Sí, arrancamos. O sea, creo que no sabía si iba a ser en... Ya, bueno, creo que al final no sabía si iba a ser en inglés, español, pero parece que todo es más castellano aquí. English, Spanish, castellano, ya. Creo que casi. Voy a mezclar entonces sí, un poco. English is fine too? Okay, maybe that's a little easier for me too. Okay, well, thank you everyone for coming to this workshop, which we're calling Create Your Roadmap for Digital Language Activism. My name is Eddie Ávila. I work with Rising Voices with the organization Global Voices. And for the past, let's say 20 years, we've been working with communities in Latin America, help supporting them as they want to use digital tools for the language work. So this is sort of like a meta type workshop because usually we run these workshops over 2 days with speakers of one language. And so it's easier to talk about your language or your work, but we're going to talk about how we developed this workshop and how we kind of roll it out with different communities. And, you know, I really want this to be participatory to get your experiences as well. But just kind of going back 20 years, 2007, back when there were, I don't know if everyone remembers blogs. Blogs were those websites where you could publish that predated social media in a way. And so we organized these series of workshops with a project called Voces Bolivianas in the city of El Alto. Anyone know about El Alto, Bolivia? Well, El Alto is the satellite city of La Paz, which is the seat of government in Bolivia. And it's a city about 95% Aymara migrants from the countryside. And, back in 2007, most of what you saw online really came from one sector of society. Those that had internet at work, who had a computer at home, who was able to afford internet, and it really didn't capture, the diversity of Bolivia. And so we set out to run a number of workshops to teach people how to blog, how to tell their own stories, how to represent themselves online, and to show a different side of Bolivia in that time. And so out of those workshops, we would rent out a whole cyber cafe. That's when, you don't see them very often anymore, but back in the day, these were large spaces like a telecentro where you can rent out internet by the hour. And so we would rent out this whole cafe internet and invite students from the public university there to learn how to create their own blog. And at those workshops, we had one young student who came in and say, "Can I write my blog in Aymara?" And obviously the answer was yes, because this was their personal space. They can choose however they want to write. And I think that's when we saw the first blog in the Aymara language out of those workshops. And soon so she would write in Spanish and Aymara, but she would have her own space online. She could write whatever she wanted in whatever language she wanted. And I think that's really was the boom of the world of internet and digital activism in Bolivia in 2007, 2008, 2009. And out of that group, and in another story, we had another workshop in the city of Oruro, which is the place where they have the Carnival, if you've heard. And we had one man who opened up his own blog about his community called Ayubombo, and he would say he would put that's in his town's name in Google, and what would come up would be, geographic data, government information about the region. But he started to write about his community, and soon after he would put the same town in Google, and his were one of the very first entries. And that was a really eye-opening moment for him and many other people who would see the power of representing themselves online on their own terms. And then out of those workshops, a group of the students would see how they could really promote Aymara on the web, and they would form their own community organization, their collective, to begin using every tool imaginable. They would start with Wikipedia, they would upload videos to YouTube, they started to localize software, they would use social media, they would have blogs, and they were really one of the pioneers of that time. Um, and then also out of that group, um, some of the volunteers would start up a Global Voices Aymara site. So this is a Global Voices where we have news from all around the world and sites in 50 different languages, more or less. And people would choose to translate stories from around the world into their own language because they wanted to see information available in their language. Just by the way, we also have Global Voice in Catalan. The editor was here yesterday, and he's a young student. He's really excited about it, and it was really cool to meet him. I'd never met him before, but we also have Global Voice in Catalan, and so this is another way for individuals to choose pathways so that their language can be represented online. And so, out of this network, we would start kind of digging deeper that, digital activism is not just communicating, chatting online, creating content, but there's a more intentional act behind it. And some of my colleagues, they would reference some of the, I can't remember what it was, but they would classify digital activism in three main kind of objectives. One is helping to elevate the status of the language so that people can have different attitudes toward the language. One is also creating more content, more information in the language, and another is to help, you know, generate a new generation of speakers. And so, why digital activism as a term? This came out from a conference we held back in 2014 in Oaxaca, Mexico, where we started to see more and more initiatives, digital initiatives in different languages, especially in Mexico. And so we wanted to create a open call for participation to invite people to come together, meet one another, share their stories, share their experiences. But my colleagues there in Mexico would say, why don't we call this digital activism for languages? It may seem a little controversial because sometimes in some countries, being an activist may have negative connotations of being a troublemaker, being someone that protests, that really, causes trouble. But, that really doesn't capture the spirit of it. It is about people wanting to see a change for their language, for their communities. And I think some people may resist that term, but I think many more really embrace it. We've heard it over the last few days here about activists, language activists, not just digital, but all types of activism. But I think that's becoming more and more commonplace, around linguistic circles about activists. And then another important part of activism, digital activism, is wanting to share their experiences and their skills with others. And I think it's a really important part because that helps build the next generation. And so those first activists we worked with in Bolivia in 2007, now 20 years later, they were students at the time. Now many have families, they may be working, they may have other responsibilities. And so there really needs to be the next generation to, carry the torch. So elevating the status of the language, it just, making it commonplace, seeing it in more spaces on websites. I remember, just kind of being amazed in the past, seeing, oh wow, on my Facebook wall, I see someone writing in Quechua or Aymara, but now it's, thankfully commonplace now, and it's not so surprising as it was maybe before. And I remember some of those young Aymara would say, they would tell us our language is something of the past, because in order to get ahead, you need to know Spanish, you need to know English, you need to know other languages. and for young people to see their language reflected on something as present day as the internet, that really sends a strong message and really helps younger people see that their language is functional in so many more domains. Um, and also, just the websites being able to create resources in the language, whether it's text, audio, video, other data. One, it helps provide that information for more people. And again, I remember the Aymara students, they would say, I'm doing this because I don't want the next generation to find the same vacuum of information that I found. And so seeing that, kind of setting the groundwork for the future. And obviously, some of the tools, the language models these days are built off of data and information, and the more that is available, groups can choose how to use it. But without that, there may be lots of gaps within that. And then also, which is probably the harder one, is how digital activism is actually creating new speakers. I think no one is under the delusion that, just by watching TikToks, you can become fluent in a language, but I think it's part of overall strategy. And so there's more and more applications, online teaching, just kind of different ways to maybe help pave the way for more speakers in language. And part of that certainly is, changing attitudes towards language. Wait a second, so up until that point, who's who has heard about the term digital activism for language? Who's kind of used that in their own work? Mariana, do you want to maybe talk about that? How maybe do you consider yourself a digital activist, and why?
Um, you caught me a little bit off guard with that, but yes, when I started my activism, it was mostly online because it was the only way for me to see what people in other languages were doing. And I'm talking about 10 years ago, like in Twitter, some activists were really active. In Instagram, not so much at that moment. Facebook as well. So I started following accounts and seeing that, yeah, like there were already established activists that had some thousands of followers, and that people were really valuing the way they were showcasing their language, their culture, like a window to cultures, to open different worlds. So yeah, that showed me that there were some influencers that grew naturally, people that maybe didn't want to do that, but out of doing it, people follow them more and more. And that got me into it for some time as well. And I more or less did the same. And I think each person finds their path of the style in which they want to share and what they want to share. I don't know if that was your question, but does anyone else want to share?
And this is I've known Mariana for many years online, and this is the first time we're meeting in person.
Oh yeah, maybe mention the Eurodigital-Lang.
Yeah.
We met through an initiative of Global Voices, Rising Voices, that was Eurodigital-Lang on Twitter, which was a rotatory account where different activists from different places of Europe, different languages, Breton, Occitan, Sardinian, took the account fully for 1 week and could tweet about their language, maps, how many speakers they had, what they know about, what they wanted to share. And so it was changing all the time. Also the name of the account and the language, the background, everything. And that was a really good initiative that had a lot of impact because it got many retweets, retweets. So people retweeting the information. And that's how we met, and it was really good. I could take the account for 1 week with Occitan. I don't know how many years ago was that, 2023?
Yeah.
Yeah. And most minority languages in Europe got there at some point. There are very few that maybe didn't get there. It was a really good initiative.
Yeah, thank you. And then this kind of reference back to that first gathering in Mexico and Oaxaca in 2014. That's the really cool logo for the event that a local artist put together. Again, we put out an open call, not really knowing who would respond. We received about 150 different applications for 25 spots. And it was really just an open space where people can present their projects, meet one another, network. But I think what we heard time and time again was I thought I was the only person interested in this. I was the only person doing this. And seeing others like them really was a great motivator. This is almost 12 years ago, and many of the participants are still in touch. We've actually been able to hire some of them to be on our team, and just that was really the first step of learning and understanding, the challenges, the successes, their aspirations, their worries, their concerns, and that was really an interesting time. And out of that, we, online you can find some of the videos, some of the interviews we conducted with many of the participants, and seeing them 12 years later again is really interesting to see how they've grown. Some have obviously maybe abandoned the project because of other priorities, but many of them are still involved in many different ways with their language. Some have gone on to, study linguistics themselves, or they may have been working in, public institutions, taking leadership roles within their community. So it was really interesting, and we replicated that model in 4 or 5 different countries, including Guatemala, Bolivia, Colombia, Peru. Again, out of a way to meet and connect with so many more activists and see how we can support them. And so every time we would have, a gathering, at one time we had a micro grants program where we could offer small grants to activists. We would always get many more applications than spots. And we thought, how can we help more people, even though we can't directly support them through events or through funding? And so out of the International Decade of Indigenous Languages with the UNESCO, they approached us to see how we can potentially create a resource for communities that want to get involved with language activism through digital media. And so together with my colleague Henry Llanos Ortiz, he's a Mayan anthropologist who is from the Yucatan Peninsula. Right now he's a professor at Bishop's University in Canada. We started to just really go through all the experiences we've had over that previous 5 or 6 years, and connect and get to know really what people really wanted out of the digital media for their languages. And so we had, first we started with a survey, just kind of open survey that we translated with help from our community into many different languages like Spanish, French, Portuguese, Russian, Turkish, Indonesian, Hindi, because those would be bridges to reach other communities. And we received more than 800 responses, and people talking about, their challenges, what they would like to do, why they like to do it. And that was really eye-opening. And together with those survey results, oops, let's go backwards. And then, contacting our networks, our existing allies, people working in the field, just to really hear about their needs and about their aspirations. We also formed an advisory committee made of many digital activists to help advise the process. Also, a number of partners. LinguaPax is on there. Early days, 2019. I think part of that was a specific survey where we heard from partner organizations also supporting individuals like that. And then also a research project we did back in 2016, kind of looking 2016, 2016, yes. Again, with my colleague, Henriana Ortiz, really looking at the early days of digital activism. And all of that, try to synthesize and come up with a format. I mean, originally the project was called a toolkit, but I think to this day we feel like that is probably not the best name for it because it really isn't about tools, but rather strategies, helping communities better understand what they'd like to see with their language. Because we know tools are always changing, and so if we would create something and say, oh, if you want to edit video, use this tool. If you want to, you know, create a podcast, use this tool because every year, internet years, 1 year can be, like in dog years, it could be 10 years. So everything changes so fast. It's kind of a quick survey. Does anyone remember what this tool is with this logo? No, I do. Yes, Vine. So it's, did you use it? Well, I watched the videos via YouTube. So this was a kind of the precursor to TikTok and even Reels where people can create short form videos. And I think it's no longer active. And so people who uploaded there may be lost unless they backed it up. This one? This is MySpace. So this was very, I mean, not that old, maybe 6 or 7 years ago, maybe. I mean, and before people really started getting off it, but again, it was very similar to Facebook where people could have their own pages and upload, customize it. A lot of bands used it to promote their work, but it was again like really connecting others with one another. Yes, Blogger. So this was a site that was called Blogger before it was purchased by Google and changed into Blogspot. This one, obviously the name is there, but you can imagine it's a video hosting platform called Blip TV. I mean, I uploaded videos there and I looked recently and the entire site is down. And so everything you may have uploaded there is no longer available. And so, again, this is just to really show that tools change overnight, not overnight, but very, very quickly. And so to really recommend communities use a particular tool, it can be very outdated. And so the way my colleague envisioned this resource is less on tools, but rather on approaches or strategies or tactics. And so it was divided into 8 different tactics, explaining how different communities are currently using digital media, digital platforms for the language work. And not saying that these are the only tactics, the only approaches, but rather kind of a starting point. Because, many communities, like I mentioned, Hakearu in Bolivia, they were on every single platform, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Wikipedia. And since many of activists are doing this as volunteers, they have limited resources, limited time. We've heard that many want to make sure that what they're doing matches, some of their goals with their work. If it's about creating a larger corpus in the language, obviously maybe TikTok may not be the right tool for them or the right strategy. But if they want to reach young people like kids, maybe Wikipedia isn't the right way to go. And so it's a way of matching their objective that obviously they should set for themselves, but helping them with kind of ideas about strategies to get there. And so the first approach is what we call facilitate, facilitar. And basically this is to, create the conditions necessary for a language kit to be used or to thrive online. So this goes everything from, creating keyboards, which some languages need to be used online. Maybe it's also helping provide internet access, because many indigenous communities are in places where internet connectivity is very poor, maybe expensive. And so there are strategies that we've seen. So every strategy that we outline, we also provide a number of examples, some case studies on ways that people are addressing that tactic, that approach. For example, in Mexico and also Colombia, many communities are using community networks. And see, these are community administered, community created communications network, because in some places, it's not commercially viable for many companies to install internet or high-speed internet in those communities because there's not a market. It doesn't have so many paying customers, and so they're also sometimes waiting for this connection to take place. And so they're taking it into their own hands to create their own community networks. And once they're connected, then they could really use it for some of the other work. Other projects such as Rachel, it's a system to create intranets, and so they can create like kind of a mesh network within a particular geographic area where people with a Bluetooth connection, they could access a database of information without having to be connected externally. That's something we're seeing in many different places. And as technology improves, the reach of those intranets can really grow, and there could be a mesh where it could extend. And there's one school in Mexico in Chiapas, which the system is housed at the school, and anyone can upload, whether it's books in the language, videos, songs, dictionaries, whatever they want, it can be uploaded to the database. And someone with the phone, as long as they're close enough, then they could access that and download to their phone. And so that's a really kind of a way to get around, maybe not having the wider internet, but that's sometimes following the trend in many other platforms where some of the bigger companies want their platform to be the internet. They want people to stay on their platform as long as possible because they don't want to, connect you to other places, because that means you're going off their platform. And so it sort of follows a similar philosophy where people can, stay within their community and access culturally relevant materials. And then there's also different organizations, groups that are working to create fonts in which their language can be used online. I think this is one case from India. So this document is about 100, 200 pages. And so there's lots of different case studies within that, and it's available in English and Spanish. The next tactic is what we call multiply. It could also be viralize. That was the original name for the tactic, but we got some really good feedback from some of our partners reminding us about history where many communities were decimated by viruses that outsiders brought in, and that can really cause remembrance about that historical tragedies. And so, we listen and we change it to multiply. And it still remains kind of the same concept is this is really about getting content and languages in front of as many people as possible. Whether it's creating memes, creating videos, influencers, they all want, their followers or their numbers to be as high as possible because that means they're being seen by more people. Whether that translates to, views by other language speakers or others that may really value that content, that's tough to tell. But, sometimes, TikTok especially, Mariana mentioned the Twitter account, that we have a rotating Twitter account, and now we're also experimenting with a rotating TikTok account for Latin America digital activists. And we're seeing many more comments um, in that account than we probably saw on Twitter. And so that's one way to see who's reading it, who's seeing the videos, um, because this is a way to kind of get the information in front of more people as possible. Um, and so a couple of the projects that we highlight in the resource, Kimeltue, which is a project in Chile, working the Wamapudungun language. It's a really fascinating project. It's a school teacher, a Mapuche school teacher in southern Chile, who partners with a illustrator, a non-Mapuche illustrator in Santiago. And together they create educational materials in the Mapudungun language. For example, they create emoticons that are more culturally relevant in the language. And all of this is available for free to download because Victor Karilaf, which is the person who is the school teacher, he also says, recognize that there's not very much materials, educational materials that are provided to teachers. And so that's one way to kind of give back and provide that service. Then also Quechua Memes, it's another project in Peru, where, as you could probably imagine from the name, it's basically creating memes in Quechua, and some of it's humorous, some of it's reflective, some of it's serious, but again, it's another way to see the language in other formats. And then this other project, the third project, is called Speak Gwich'in to Me, which is a project in Canada. It's created by a young woman named JC, who again, using that hashtag, creates all sorts of, publications in the language and encourages others to create similar content, but with the same hashtag. The next one is normalizar. And this is also another way for, like I mentioned with the Aymara example, where it's become much more typical, much more normal to see the language in many different formats. And so it's to help language communities get it in as many places as possible so that it becomes much more second nature, it becomes more common to see. For example, many of the groups have been localizing the Firefox browser. So Mozilla, which is the creator of the Mozilla browser, they make it available so that anyone can localize it. They can put all the menu bar, all the back end is available in that language from the work of different volunteers. And so that's obviously is a big difference between other proprietary software, the Chrome browser, Microsoft Internet Explorer, which all that goes through the central office, that they decide which languages, if any, these other, browsers, for example, should be in. But rather, Firefox has traditionally allowed any community to go in and localize it themselves. And it's also very similar to Wikipedia. I was recently at a conference in Colombia with indigenous Wikimedians who are, creating their own version of Wikipedia in their language. And that goes much beyond, creating articles, but rather part of it is localizing the interface into the language. And again, any language can do so. They start off as an incubator project, meaning it's like on a trial run. And then once they gather enough volunteers, enough articles, then they could graduate to become an official Wikipedia version. And right now there's 7 official Wikipedias in indigenous languages in Latin America. There's Guarani, there's Quechua, Aymara, there's Wayu Naiki, which is the language spoken by the Wayu people between Venezuela and Colombia. That was one of the newest ones. And then another one is Nahuatl from El Salvador, which was just launched about a couple of months ago. Nahuatl in Mexico. And there's a few others that are in the works, but it's a lot of work. But I think people are seeing how this can help others see their language in many different platforms themselves. So I mentioned Wikipedia, Firefox, and then also there's a tool called, it's now called Living Dictionaries, but they used to call talking dictionaries from the Living Tongues Institute. And they also help any community that wants to use their platform to create their own dictionary. As we've seen during the pandemic, there were just explosion of number of, language courses offered online. And so many people were, stuck at home. And we saw many opportunities for them to, maybe connect with a group class or maybe individual class. And, that's really one of the ways that ties back into sort of the acquisition dimension of digital activism, of helping to create new speakers. Again, probably someone's not going to be fluent after spending, a 6-week course in a language, but rather it's part of an overall maybe learning strategy. A few projects that we highlighted in the resource, Wayu Naiki para el Mundo, which is a really interesting project, which I don't think it's active anymore. But basically, it involves a YU professor in Colombia who connects with his student who is living, I think, here in Spain, I think here in Barcelona even. And they would record the lessons and put it up on YouTube so that not only the student is learning, but rather anyone else can watch, obviously not in real time, but it was a really kind of interesting, and they made it humorous. And it was kind of a more personal look at kind of how people are using, the digital element to teach. And then, obviously there's apps that can help you learn maybe vocabulary or learn some greetings, but it's all part of that tactic of educating. Recovering, a lot of this is related to documentation, perhaps digitalization of language materials, and also deciding on how those materials are made available. There's another tactic related to that, but it's really about leveraging these technologies to, bring back some of the material back into the hands of the community, and then deciding how they want to be used. And so everything from documentation to, digitizing archives, all of that is related here. So that first project, Yadoku Uruki, which is really fascinating. It's a project that we also supported many years ago. It was a young man from the Huitoto community in Colombia, based in the Colombian Amazon. He was orphaned at a young age, and he left his community to go to study in the city. And then when he became older, he would return to the community, and he found a box of cassettes of, and they were interviews with his late father, with a linguist who would come in and interview his father, and stories, songs. It was a kind of a rich material there, and so he really wanted to honor his father and and digitize that information. But then lots of conversations started to take place around that, whether that material belonged to his father and then by default all his brothers and sisters, and whether they need to all agree on whether that information could be uploaded to the internet. Did it belong to the linguist who, bought the equipment, went to the community? Did it belong to the community itself because they were about traditions of the community? I think it wasn't necessarily resolved, and he went ahead and, and uploaded some of the material himself. And you could see in some of the comments on Facebook, for example, you know, this belongs to all of us. You need to consult with us. And it was kind of just, obviously we didn't get involved with that, but we saw that take place and we advised him, we helped them. But in the end, it was his decision, and he did get some buy-in from the community from that. But it was a kind of interesting case on how people are facing those questions. And probably my favorite one of all of these is Imagine. And so this is how activists are finding new formats, new ways to represent or to use our language. This is everything from music, hip hop, animation. Some are dubbing, popular TV shows in the language. Some of them are really quite good. I mean, people, it's not simply just talking over something, but rather having to act it out and really put emphasis on some words. And that's it's been really kind of cool to see. Comics. And so this is really one that really, as you can imagine, captures the imagination of many people because they see their language in different light. And so a couple examples, I think Joseph probably recognizes Yasmin, a singer who also from the Yucatan Peninsula, who often teams up with hip hop artists in Maya. And then the comic book from Indonesia. There's some different books that people have produced there. This one is Defend. It is related to advocating for the language, whether through campaigns, but using digital media to do so. I think again the campaign that was mentioned before, it was really about a social media advocacy campaign where different hosts would rotate and take the account and really talk about the importance of revitalizing language. It wasn't necessarily for other speakers of the language, but rather an awareness campaign, talking about rights, talking about linguistic justice. And so there's a number of campaigns that do so. And there's one that isn't here that we saw in Mexico where they would state, todas las lenguas son iguales, all the languages are the same, whether it's a language that has 10 million speakers or one that has 5 speakers. And so it's really a way to position that narrative that all languages should be treated the same. And then protecting, this is about once the information is online or in digital format, what are the protocols that could be put in place to protect and to help return back to the community where they have access to it. They have, autonomy in deciding how and how and where they should be used. One of the cases that we looked at is traditional labels, which is it's a project that was out of an organization called Local Context, which I think has changed its name, but rather realizing that many licenses that are used online, whether they're Creative Commons, are not necessarily relevant to many indigenous contexts, and so they introduced a number of other labels that helps inform how that content is, how the community wants that content to be used. And so there's everything from especially when it comes to traditional information that may be sacred, but only certain people in their tradition should have access to it. Even some cultures, it can only be accessed during certain times of the year or by certain people with certain statuses. And again, all of that is decided by the community themselves, and these give them a little more options to become more flexible. So all that is in this 193-page document, and it can be downloaded as a PDF. And we've always recognized that maybe this isn't always accessible to many people. And so back in 2020, we started to experiment with a number of formats where we can help share this information with more people. During the pandemic, we would run a number of presentations or workshops online. We had some in West Africa, Southern Africa, in India, in Oceania, South America, Central America. But then also we understood the limitations sometimes of virtual courses. And I think, at the beginning of the pandemic, it may seem very novel, but then now, I think people are so used to online events that they may have it in their background, or if they may be, just listening in, that's not necessarily participatory, but definitely this workshop is made to be participatory. And so we will find that maybe the virtual isn't the ideal way to run these workshops and to explore a physical space. And so we started to experiment a couple years ago with running in-person workshops with different partners. In this case, we worked with a lot of Wikimedia partners in Ghana, in Nigeria, India, Indonesia, in Ireland, and it was really about a workshop so that they could build their own roadmap. Again, we didn't set this out to become a recipe saying you need to follow this step by step, use these tools, but rather provide an overview of how these tools could be used or how these platforms could be used. And in the end, each content would be very specific, because based off their context, based off of, their objectives about what they wanted to change with their language. And so out of this, each person there would create their own personal roadmap. Oops. Oh, let's go back. And so, the objectives of this workshop is really to support speakers of indigenous languages, but also a much broader definition, minoritized, endangered languages. I think anyone that really identifies with this, it's open. And this roadmap incorporates all those different reflections on, what the change they'd like to see, whether it's one of the three that we mentioned with status, corpus, or maybe acquisition of or creation of new speakers, but also not limited to them, but rather each person defines what it is they'd like to articulate, what the change they want to see. And then using some of the tactics, approaches as guides, like this is something I see relevant to my case, maybe adopting some of the, projects, elements that they've seen in the toolkit. Then also, once they complete the roadmap, to connect them with others. And so the partnership with Wikimedia was natural, where the ideas from this workshop, maybe they can become more motivated to work with their language or get involved. And then they can naturally connect with a group, local group, that can help support them and not do this on their own. And so So I'm going to kind of run through some of the different elements we have for the workshop. And again, we're not doing the whole full workshop because it's 2 days and it's sometimes based around someone that comes specifically for that objective. But I think, a really important part um, of this is when we market, when we share the open call for this workshop, we say that, this is so that you can reflect and create your own strategy for your language work. And we're not going to be teaching you how to create a video. We're not going to be teaching you how to create your own blog. And even with that, people come in with that idea like, okay, I want to learn how to do this right now. But I think what we've learned along the way is it's really important that people understand why they want to do this and whether this is really the right strategy for them based off what they want to do. Because um, I think people may feel like I mentioned in the short panel, the narrative about um, your language should be on these platforms or else you're going to be left behind. And so I think even though a lot of our work is around digital, I think we really respect that. We respect or recognize that there are groups that maybe think this isn't the right time for our group, our community to get online because there's so many other things we should be doing or we could be doing. And so I think this is a part of that process. Um, and again, we've run this with many communities where it's speakers of the same language. Maybe they don't know each other, um, but really about um, finding a safe space to talk about why they're there with one another. And so even before we talk about the tactics, we create spaces where people can talk about themselves and do so. And we from our reports, we weren't in every workshop, but from what we heard, this is a really important part of it where people can talk about and share whatever they want, optional because they can be triggering for some people. But I don't know, wanted to get a sense of from the group, have you been in spaces like this before where you can talk about, maybe your own language story, um, talk about maybe a time where you felt ashamed or maybe felt scared to use your language or someone told you that you shouldn't use your language, but also at the same time, maybe a time where someone judged you or corrected you or discouraged you from using language. Maybe a story about transmitting the language to your children or another person, um, reflecting on a time where you used the language in another space that maybe you aren't used to. So I don't know. Does anyone maybe want to talk about their own experiences? I mean, however much you want to share.
Just a point. So, is it necessary to be a native speaker of the language to be an activist for the language?
I think if people self-identify. I mean, it's not for us to say that. I think again, it's hard for us to say you're an activist and you're not. Or I mean, I think we're past that in terms of because we've seen many cases where for example, in Guarani, for example, in Paraguay, many of the speakers of Guarani aren't ethnic Guaranis, but they still are very much a promoter of the language as a native person would be. Many of the people who are doing Wikipedia in Nahuatl in El Salvador, they're second learners, that they're native speakers, that they may not even have roots in Nahuatl. Um, and so I don't know. Do you have a thought? Do you have a thought?
All of these reflections have to do with a very personal experience with language. So maybe not all of them would be relevant for all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. I think I don't know if we've run a workshop for a place where maybe um, the participant wasn't a native speaker, so I'm not sure if seeing the open call would discourage them from signing up, thinking that I'm not a native speaker, this isn't for me. But I don't know. I think, but yeah, they are very personal, very maybe they wouldn't have the same experiences, but I think generally what we've seen is people are accepting of people that want to learn the language and do so with respect. I mean, I was really, I don't know, just here and also in the Welsh context of seeing many immigrants pick up the language and being advocates for the language, respecting the language, understanding the importance. And I think from what I see is people respect that and they, I don't know, is that the case here in Catalan?
Yeah, I think it's usually activists are usually the main language because they want to project it. That's true, but when you get involved in one of these communities, in multilingual city like Barcelona or in a small community, and you learn the language and you really get involved with the community. Sometimes you are even more activist than the
Jaime, for example,
Yeah.
who was from Pass. He's from Extremadura. Maybe 3 years ago, didn't know anything about Catalan. Now he's a Spanish Catalan speaker and a super activist.
Yes.
Mm.
And one of the guys yesterday in the round table
Mhm.
that came from Congo many years ago, but now he's
Mm.
teaching Catalan
Yeah.
or participating in this conversation with newcomers,
Mhm.
promoting the Catalan language and the use of the Catalan language in this context. So, yeah, of course, they can become.
I would say that there are many activists that are not native speakers. So
Mhm.
these reflections can be useful to arouse the self-esteem of speakers, but not necessarily related
Mhm.
to what an activist, because the activist has a particular mindset.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, yeah, see,
Bueno, profe, agradecerle por el espacio, si todos me entiendan, pero el tema de las comunicaciones, la tecnología, y en ese punto que nos centramos, leo como que está en las reflexiones, ¿no? Y hay un sentir y el miedo que nosotros, como pueblos indígenas, como pueblo NASA, nos sentimos inferiores de ser esas personas allá en la zona rural, al que está acá en la zona urbana. Y desde mi experiencia, leo todas las reflexiones y tengo un relato grande de cómo vine escalando, puedo decir yo, y que hoy me permita estar aquí, de escuchar de ustedes ese conocimiento, esa lucha de existir, pero ese pensamiento de seguir siendo nosotros, quienes somos. Porque muchas veces, al no estar en este espacio y de nosotros poder hablar, con ese miedo a veces, con ese miedo porque de pronto lo que yo voy a decir no se entienda o no se reconozca, porque mucho más allá es eso que lo que uno ve como persona en este ejercicio. Y cuando uno siente de que de lo que yo estoy diciendo es también reconocida, ese valor me llena de alegría de quién soy yo, más allá de poder ser otra persona. Y más cuando uno ha crecido o ha nacido en un contexto donde familiarmente la vivencia y la práctica en su lengua es un conocimiento diferente. Pero si yo me relaciono con otros contextos, yo puedo también tener otra mirada y ahí es lo que hemos venido luchando en el contexto educativo de que orientar a nuestras familias, de decirle que su semilla, si aprende uno, dos o más idiomas, él es el que tiene ese conocimiento. Pero el padre siente que si solamente le enseñamos de lo que somos nosotros y piensa que solamente le vamos a enseñar lo que somos nosotros. No, nosotros estamos diciendo que tenemos que armonizar de que el niño, el joven, la semilla, donde esté, con quien esté, sin perder su raíz, pero también tiene otros conocimientos, él es el que va a sentir que tiene toda esa sabiduría y conocimiento. Puede hablar puede hablar de su raíz y también puede responder a otras realidades que hay en la comunidad o en el territorio, en la sociedad. Entonces, yo aquí viendo, una de las reflexiones que está aquí es ese miedo que uno tiene y no poder responder y decir cómo yo me puedo mover y relacionarme con el mundo, pero también puedo mostrar de dónde vengo. Y esa es la fuerza que uno le da. Y en tema de las comunicaciones, la tecnología, que hoy estamos absorbidos en ello, es una herramienta fundamental de que el niño no se centre solamente en ver lo que viene de afuera, sino que también muestre y también puede armonizar de que esos dos sistemas, podría yo decir, que el niño entienda y comprenda y que se la goce, porque es lo que uno puede hacer ahorita. Como experiencia, me decían a mí, un referente, una persona que habla la lengua, vive en la lengua, sabe su cultura, practica su espiritualidad, pero maneja también la tecnología. Y estamos a eso también a hacerlo. Pero a veces siente que como que no, que usted el NASA no puede hacer esto. No, el hablante de la lengua NASA o cualquier lengua, también tiene, su conocimiento está a eso de poder lograrlo. Pero eso ya sería como en sí ponerlo que nosotros veamos dentro de lo que estamos haciendo, que todo el contexto, lo que nos rodea, llevémoslo a ese conocimiento y cognitivamente la semillita tiene para aprenderlo. Y no podemos pensar los padres que no va a poder, porque es lo que los padres están diciendo ahorita. Si solamente usted le enseña la educación propia, porque ha llegado en nuestro contexto, ahorita que estamos luchando con el sistema educativo propio, y el padre de familia está diciendo, pero si usted quiere enseñarle solamente la educación propia, y cuando se dice educación propia, sienten como que si fuéramos a enseñar solamente lo nuestro y lo demás no. Es que es universal, es lo que le estamos diciendo, pero no todos han entendido y es la lucha que estamos haciendo. Y profe, pues mi aporte a relación a ello. Bye.
Gracias. Anyone else? ¿Alguien más? Sí,
Yo
sí,
te
sí.
quería preguntar, era un poco lo que comentaba el compañero Ruda, pero también conectando con algo que tú habías dicho. I'll say it. You understand Spanish? No, no, you don't. You do understand Spanish. Okay, sorry. Good. Yeah, yeah. Thomas also, yeah, yeah. Thomas also, yeah. Good. Yeah. Something you said about the right path, ¿no? Whether there is, it is the right path, the digital domain, ¿no? Si él, ¿no? Le contaba que lo que ha dicho, ¿no? Eddie, de alguna comunidad que justamente no ve ¿no? Este ámbito específico, ¿no? De lo digital como un camino estratégico propio o estratégico o primordial o, ¿no? ¿no? O prioritario, esa es la palabra, ¿no? Prioritario para la revitalización, ¿no? Y quería preguntarte cuál es tu experiencia, o sea, qué argumentos te daban esas comunidades justamente para decir, nosotros no, aunque quizá venga luego con los challenges, ¿no? Quizá con lo que vas a presentar alguna diapositiva más adelante, pero si nos puedes avanzar un poco, ¿qué argumentos tienen estas comunidades para decir, no queremos ese camino, ¿no? O este camino no es para nosotros, ¿no?
Voy a seguir en inglés. I think we haven't seen many of those examples yet, or I think people generally, this is still pretty good, but rather, but we're seeing that change where they want to pause and wait and see, and see what are the terms under that. But I think more and more is with AI. I think that's more of a topic than it was with maybe social media, which has its own problems as well, the data and you know, I just, we're talking about, content moderation, for example, where many platforms brag that they have their platforms in so many different languages, but if I'm not able to serve those communities, then what good is having those languages, whether, um, you know, automated moderation where things are classified as violating community or the terms of service, but rather because they can't read it, they can't process it, and so they automatically say, and that's a sort of form of lowering the language in the platform's eyes. And so anyway, but I think we haven't seen communities totally refuse, but I think there are individuals within those communities that are saying, uh, you know, we don't want anything to do with. I mean, I think we've seen that with especially AI. Like no good could come from this. Um, and there's others who are more pragmatic and saying, uh, we understand that there's risk, there's harms, but what can we do? Our language is in trouble. We need to grab onto anything we can. But even within the community themselves, I mean, there's different sides. We have another workshop we do. We have a really cool exercise called the spectrometer. I don't know if you heard that before, where you put a line on the floor and you do a problematic statement and people stand if they agree or disagree. You know, is and one of the statements was having content in my language created by AI is better than having no content at all. And you could see just the whole range. I agree. I don't, it is, and people try to not argue, but debate and bring people to their side. And we had a 2-day workshop on AI and languages in Mexico City. And you can see people's attitudes change over 2 days. Like, I didn't realize, both ways. Both ways. People saying, I didn't realize this was this was a part of it. I mean, I thought I was, wow, this is great. I could create images of my culture, but then really thinking about it, that's really messed up the way they try to stereotype or they, false information. But then other people say, well, this has lots of opportunities as well. But if you do it the right way, because I think it's no longer good versus bad, like I said the other day, but rather there are alternatives that are emerging, and that should also be an option. Should it be one or the other, but it could be maybe something in between, you know. So I don't know. That was your question about like the arguments, but I think people.
Yeah. Just to give an example, I have a student, who kind of, she's very concerned of the use of AI because of environmental issues. That's a topic, That's a topic at my university, Students saying, I really don't want to use AI because I know, we have an environmental crisis, and I don't, the less I use it, the better.
Mhm.
So, but of course, that's a completely different context now. But yeah, ethical issues also, data sovereignty.
But then the big language users will burn out the planet before the small language users can get access.
And there's a movement called frugal AI. I don't know if you heard that. It's frugal, frugal, and it's sort of recognizing all those things, but trying to mitigate as much as possible, or using lots of resourcefulness. I mean, there are lots of communities now in Mexico, Zapotec, uh, especially where they're creating their own models, but it's all based locally on the computer. It's not connected to the cloud. They control everything. They decide what data is being used. And is that better than nothing? Is that better than the full models? I mean, no one's decided, but it's really interesting to see that it's alternatives out there. The Maori, for example, Tekiku. There's an organization in North America called FLAIR, First Languages. And when we ran those workshops in Mexico, we invited indigenous developers to run those. And that was really, really powerful. Not only they have the technical expertise, but they understand some of those considerations instead of something, I don't know. I think that was really kind of interesting to see this peer model. So I mean, all of that is, again, not necessarily, it's related to this when we run those workshops. Come to this workshop. It's a forum on AI and indigenous languages. People think we're going to teach them which tool they could use to create their own content. And we've had to be really, really specific. We're not going to teach you how to, create your own model. We're not going to teach you how to gather your own data to be able to upload, but rather reflect on those things. That's a really important part of it. And so I think people are disappointed because we're not, but I think this is an important part of it. And so again, with the toolkit as well, just reflecting on why they want to be to be able to articulate, why do you want to use digital tools with your language? And I don't know, everyone else is doing it, why not? Or it's just fun. I mean, that's still a good answer. I mean, it can be fun, but I think once they realize it's part of a bigger process, it's, a political act even, like, okay, I'm pushing back against systems. Like, but all I want to do is create a fun meme or create video, but like it or not, you're part of a movement that is taking ownership. I know apropiarse. I don't know what's the English. There's not a good English translation for apropiarse, right? Like take ownership, or to use it the way you want to use it, like the way it's not used. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, take ownership is part of it, but there's like it's like at least in Latin America, it's a very fine difference where it's almost like
without having the right.
almost like a rebelling against something. You know, Mark Zuckerman didn't create Facebook so that you can, create your own put your language on it, but rather it's a bigger thing. But I'm going to use it the way I see it, and that's sort of, I think, the spirit of activism is doing that your own way and finding other ways. But then now there's more choices to, um, yeah. I mean, people have tried to create their own Facebook. I don't know if you remember Diaspora. It was a site that they would say this is the alternative to Facebook, open source. They didn't sell your data. And it was like a huge movement at the time, like, oh yeah, let's sign up for that. But then it didn't take off, obviously, because the powers that be is really powerful. And so, but I think perhaps, with AI, maybe that's an opportunity that maybe didn't happen in with social media, where people can really show an alternative. I think it's hard to do a Facebook within your own computer and not having to be connected to the cloud, because that's part of the trick, is to be connected with others. But I don't know. I think people are seeing that you can create your own. There's a site called GPT for All. I don't know if you've heard that. It's a platform where you can create your own chatbot locally. You can decide what information you feed it, how you control it, and it's really, really cool. And I've seen lots of communities using that these days. But anyway, I think it's really part of that conversation. That, I mean, not talking so much how to use the tools, but rather why and how and who benefits, who's harmed by it. I think that's part of the natural evolution of these technologies. Again, when we ran these blogging workshops in El Alto, the first day was set up your blog, design it how you want it to be, and it was less about the content. Like, why do you want to write? Why do you want to represent? Because your community is stereotyped in the media, because when it's written about in the international press, it's only when there's a conflict or a protest. And so in hindsight, we probably should have done that more, like talk about the why instead of the how. But I think we're getting there. And I think more people are more critical about technology now these days than before, which is a good thing. And then, you know, part of, I'm gonna jump ahead real quick. So, I mean, this is sort of the end result of the workshop where the participants have their roadmap. It's just a template where they can articulate, you know, the change they want to see in their language, but also what skills, what resources they already have. Because I think it's sort of a inventory of where I want to get to, but what do I need to get there? And part of that is, what do I have at my disposal? What are the challenges that may prevent me from getting there? And also, what are the skills or resources that I need to get? And so all that together helps them, like a roadmap, get from one place to another, understanding that it's not a straight line, that there's so many different contexts. And when we do it in person, you know, this is sort of kind of the more creative part of it, where they come away with something like a kind of a plan, you know. So you know, everything from what resources they have, not just financial resources, but you know, I know how to edit a video, or I know how to edit an audio, or whatever, but that's part of something that they already have. And then what do they need? And that's something we try to do at the end, is once we understand their needs, try to match them up with others that can maybe help them. And so a part of that also is, you know, not just, okay, fill us out, you know, and then create your mobile app, but as part of that process of accompanying them and talking about challenges. You know, some of the ones, some of the ones we've recognized, and it's in the toolkit as well. You know, linguistic challenges, some of the social and cultural challenges, accessibility, political, technical, sustainability, and technological challenges. And this is all kind of based off just our research, but also hearing the stories of the activists themselves, to hear what that they're coming against as well. You know, linguistic, I think many of you probably know better than I am about some of the challenges with linguist information, with digital technologies. You know, so, you know, my grandmother spoke Quechua in Bolivia, and obviously got, you know, lost along the way. But every time I've wanted to learn Quechua, that, you know, in Bolivia and in Peru, there's kind of two accepted ways of writing it. There's one with 3 vowels and one with 5 vowels. And you ask 10 people, 10 Quechua speakers, which one you should learn. 5 people say this one, 5 people say that one. And not only that, their way is the right way, but the other one is the wrong way. And so that's a very demotivating thing. Like, how far should I get into the learning it if this is the wrong way? And I don't know. It's something that I ran across in terms of, you know, choosing among variants and dialects. You know, we've also, again, this is along the spectrum as well. People are very pragmatic, or people are very, you know, principled in their stances. Is it okay to use loan words from the dominant language? Again, you ask 10 people, 5 people say this, 5 people say that. And that's a challenge that many activists run against, that it confuses them and may be demotivating. And so that's just kind of one of the challenges we've seen in terms of, is there any other challenges with language and technology similar that you could think of, that you run across?
Well, I was going to ask, since a big part of the effort, the rising voices are social networks, and they have changed so much, as you pointed out. So, like, 10 years ago, they were more text-based, and now they are more video-based
Mhm.
in the image, the audio. So from this perspective, probably it's easier now to incorporate new languages because you don't even need to write them. I don't know if you have some observations about that. Is how much more multilingual is now the social internet.
No, I think, I mean, videos where you don't have to worry about 3 vowels or 5 vowels, that really opens up a lot of possibilities. And I think, I resisted for many, many years of opening up a TikTok account because I didn't want one more thing on my phone and the time, but recognize that there's so much happening there. And it's amazing just how many more people are using their language in TikTok than ever before. And, the account that was mentioned here about Twitter, a lot of that was written. You had to write a tweet, you had to write a couple sentences, even though a lot of people did write in Spanish as advocacy, but many others wrote in the language as a way to show that. But now with TikTok, you could just talk, and I don't know, it's very much more accessible. Um, but I think that part about uh, loan words and mixing, do you aim for everything to be in the language, or do you aim for it the way people actually talk in daily life? And what do you do? Because I remember like hearing the radio in Cochabamba, like there's a Quechua radio station, and I would try to listen in and see how much I could pick up. And then they would use a lot of Spanish words for words that don't exist in Quechua, and it gave you a false sense of like, oh wow, I'm understanding more than I really think. But I was just kind of picking up on the context from the Spanish words. Okay, this is sort of what they're talking about. But anyway, it's kind of interesting to see those. It can be, especially in Quechua, battles to the death, which way is correct. But I think generally within younger populations, it's like, no, why are we getting involved with this? We all want the same thing. Let's figure out a way to accommodate everyone. And, if you want to use, new terminology, you can. If you want to use Spanish, you can. Let's just, because we're at an urgent phase. So anyway, that's something we're seeing as well. Accessibility is another challenge in terms of connectivity, not just in the infrastructure, but also costs. I was just looking at a graphic the other day in terms of, breaking down how much a gigabyte of data is in every country. And, many of Latin American countries, it's one of the most expensive ones. I think Bolivia is the second most expensive in the region. And when you compare that to, lower salaries, someone is spending a greater percentage of their monthly income on internet costs than maybe someone in North America. And so what does that do for the community? It maybe prevents more people that want to get involved that they can't. And, and then also it does maybe exclude some of the older generations from getting involved, which can be a valuable resource for younger people. And also related again with economics, sometimes being able to afford mobile phones or models that are more up to date or can accommodate certain tools with keyboards, for example, that can be a challenge that some face. Technological. I think different levels of understanding of how these technologies work. I think also with some of the models, around AI, I think we're seeing many more activists that have no background in programming are able to produce some of these models, especially around some of those platforms like GPT for all. And so I think that's becoming less of a challenge than maybe before, that the barrier to entry is less than before, but I think that's still kind of something we're seeing. And then also the social and cultural, again, related back to the reflections, just sometimes the discrimination, racism, especially for activists, women, they face sometimes double, not only the sexist comments or trolling, but also, discriminative comments, and that can be very demotivating for many people. And then again, even though a lot of my experience is Latin America, we do also understand, we try to make this as global as possible, but there's many countries that don't even recognize that indigenous communities exist. And so that's a major challenge for some communities to even practice activism, that they aren't targeted by the government. And again, that's kind of another challenge. And then sustainability. Again, this isn't necessarily only about finances, even though it may help. When we provided some of the small grants to our projects, we asked how they plan to carry on their project, and many of them responded, okay, we'll find another grant to continue it. But I think what we're looking for is, how can you create a structure where people will want to continue regardless, in the best way that they can. Maybe it's creating peer networks, maybe it's finding other volunteers, maybe it's just a way to prevent burnout, because that's something we've seen in many cases, where it just became a lot of pressure to have all this on their shoulders. Because I think that's something we're also offering to some of our activists, is support of peer support, but also well-being, because it is a lot of pressure to work on these issues. And then going back to what resources or skills they currently have, it's just a way to do an inventory of what they're able to access for their strategy. And then it's basically 2 days of a lot of reflection, a lot of group conversations, and we do see people come from this motivated and inspired to do something. I think part of it is finding like-minded people, and having it in a physical space. I think we didn't have the same kind of results when we did it virtually, for many reasons that we know, because of dynamics. But then once they finish their plan, we try to match them up with organizations, or like what skills or resources would you like to still pursue. And nowadays there's lots of tutorials online, there's workshops every once in a while that offer podcasting, and so just kind of helping them access those resources, those opportunities, so that they can start working towards kind of what they want to see. So I don't know. I think that's sort of my initial presentation. I really wanted this to be a kind of a discussion, or hear from other experiences. I wasn't quite sure who's going to be in the workshop, but I think all of you are involved with some aspects of this. But I would love to hear some feedback or some suggestions. Do you think this might work in your context? I don't know. I definitely wanted this to be open and conversations. Any general thoughts?
I think that many activists are in the other workshop. The workshop was also about activism,
Yeah.
but not digital.
Mhm.
So, for example, I'm not an activist. I'm more from technology. So I don't know what matters.
I can share something, but I'll pass on. I don't want to talk all the time. But sharing something that, I was talking to Didier Chan, Yucatec Maya activist. He's been very involved in digital strategies to revitalize Yucatec Maya with the stop motion videos, and I was asking him about the impact, for example, of his work. And actually, we're writing a paper for a handbook together on what he was doing. And something he said that kind of struck me, is that more than the impact of the animation, the video and the stop motion, the animation that it's now available on YouTube. For him, the most important part of that project was how that was translated into the analogic world, if you like, and the process of working with the kids, for the stop motion video. So rather than the product of the stop motion video, it was working, like preparing everything, meaning scissors and papers and everything, I'm talking about analogic. And that was like what triggered the use of the language and like in real life. I know that the online life is also real, but like, like the offline versus the online. And for him, it was like that kind of, link between the online and the necessity of the offline to really have an impact, in the little community he was working in. I think that's like a relevant point, of everything we've seen now.
Bien, una herramienta de comunicación, la que podemos como detallar, ¿no? Digamos, en el tema tecnológico. Como pueblo NASA, en el tema de, hacemos primeramente un análisis, cómo yo entiendo la comunicación. Y la comunicación de lo que estamos hablando como herramienta, como una manera también de aprovechar, porque ya estamos absorbidos por la tecnología. Más allá desde la cosmovisión, siempre buscamos al joven, a la semilla, de que entienda qué es la comunicación y para qué la comunicación, pero desde nuestra cultura hay otra forma de comunicación. Y esa comunicación es lo que queremos enraizar nuevamente, digamos, revitalizarla, porque nosotros cuando hablamos una lengua tenemos una comunicación propia. Esta comunicación propia no se puede reflejar aquí desde la tecnología, porque sabemos de que la comunicación cultural es como yo interpreto la manifestación natural desde el cosmos, desde la espiritualidad. Va desde el sentir, pensar y vivir. Yo siento, pienso y lo vivo. Y esa comunicación, bajarlo a que hoy un joven hablante de una lengua debe tenerlo claro. Porque si no nos vamos más allá de solamente entender la comunicación a una herramienta tecnológica. Y es el vacío más grande que estamos nosotros desconectándonos. Y desde ese espacio, sí, nosotros estamos también apostándole a que la comunicación tecnológica como herramienta de la revitalización nos lleve a encontrar a que nos preparemos, porque más allá de entender y comprender la comunicación de lo que hoy tenemos, digamos, de las herramientas tecnológicas, no nos pueden de que nos lleve a que es solamente la comunicación, es hablar de la tecnología y ya. Y ese es el reto más grande de lo que estamos absorbidos y que el joven, la semilla en nuestro territorio, debe de entender qué es la comunicación propia, desde la comunicación natural. Cuando usted sueña, cuando usted ve, cuando usted siente, puede ser despierto o dormido, hay una comunicación. Y esa comunicación te ayuda también a decir qué es bueno y qué es malo. Y eso sí, pues, como experiencia, podría solamente dejarlo aquí como para ustedes que están escuchándome, es lo que hacemos. Digamos que como pueblo NASA es poder que estos dos conocimientos queden impregnados en nuestras semillas. sabiendo del sentir, pensar y vivir la comunicación. Bye.
Gracias.
Thank you. I wanted to mention what you mentioned before about not being a native speaker, because I think in the space of digital activism and minoritized language activism in general, there is not so much space for people who are not native speakers. Also because of their own maybe the feeling of, you know, an imposter syndrome. If I'm not a native speaker, what do I even do here, right? Like, why should people actually, you know, listen to me, or like, why should people react to what I'm doing, right? And there are many initiatives that I see for minoritized languages where a non-native speaker maybe wouldn't be accepted, not necessarily because of, you know, being a bad place or bad people who are organizing this, but for some other reasons that are maybe out of their control. But I think it's an important part of the people who are including their language, maybe not even as activists in the main sense of the word, but for example, here many people who are not native speakers but use Catalan daily, like me, for example. These are the people that just by doing that, just by using the language, are also doing some kind of activist job. And so I think there is not enough space or not enough maybe voice given to this part of the, you know, of the speakers. Also in places like this one, for example, here obviously yes, but there are many other conferences or other initiatives where this doesn't really exist. So but also the imposter syndrome then of, you know, I don't know if you in your workshops, for example, if you had people who would be like, yeah, I would maybe join, but like maybe my language skills are not good enough, or, you know, I don't feel like I should be representing or creating something for the community because of my language skills. So yeah.
I mean, I think there's imposter syndrome among native speakers as well. We have a program called the Catalyst Program where we support 10 speakers of Mayan languages every year with a fellowship program. So they receive a small grant to do a project. They join a learning community, and they, over a course of a year, they get mentored by 2 peer mentors, and they become part of this project. But every time we select the 10 newest fellows, kind of at the opening meeting, a lot of them say, I didn't think I would get picked, or I wasn't even sure to apply. Like, who might apply? And so we see that sort of even kind of hesitancy to even step forward and say, I want to do this. But then by the end of that work, the year, we have a summit, which Joseph attended one time in Merida. We have a closing dinner, like sort of like ending of the program, and, you know, everyone gives their reflections, and you just kind of see that confidence, like of the difference between the beginning and the end. Like they feel like now I can do something, you know, empowered, for lack of a better word. They feel empowered to do something about it, not sit back and wait for the inevitable, but rather, you know, contributing their contribution towards something for the language. And that really changes them, I think. And almost the digital part is almost a vehicle for that. And, you know, we've seen some of the alumni do other projects or get invited to international conferences. They become, I don't know, just so many great things happened. And so almost the digital part was as an afterthought. It's sort of the process of of just feeling like they can play a role in that. So I mean, even though digital and internet is our thing, we're known for that, and a lot of the things we talk about is digital, but it's really about the people and really about the individuals who are using technology as a tool to help them take on leadership roles within their community and play a role in that. So I don't know. I'm always inspired by that. But then I see that, like, who am I to like, I didn't think I would get picked. I didn't think I should do this. But then at the end, like, I'm glad I did it. And how do you change that? Because it does feel pretty daunting when you see the numbers, you see, after all these 15, 20 years of digital activism, what has really changed? I don't know. I think that's a pending study or something that needs to figure out, because there's so many factors that are involved. But, if you go back to El Alto in Bolivia, seeing the census numbers, the numbers continue going down, like numbers of speakers, people who self-identify as speakers, and would that have been faster without some of these interventions, or was it just does it not make a difference? I don't know. It's really kind of existential questions of, after all this digital work, what has changed? I know it's language by language, case by case, but I don't know. From your point of view, have you seen things change ever since the digital component has been introduced to kind of the existing work that has been done before? I don't know.
So if you see the digital actions as a way to help in the preservation in the real world, I don't know. This should be, as you say, evaluated, but I don't think it does have much influence. But if you evaluate how the presence in the digital world has grown for certain languages, it certainly has. I don't know. Certainly, it hasn't harmed the real world either, I guess.
Hola, hablo castellano. Yo quizás sí que vengo más del activismo y de un activismo que, como decía el compañero, siento un poco como síndrome del impostor o de la impostora. En el proyecto en el que yo estoy es un proyecto que está en Aragón, en una comunidad autónoma aquí al lado de Cataluña, y promovemos el impulso del catalán en Aragón, algo que actualmente se está promoviendo desde el gobierno que quede en desuso y que no existe, y sí existe. Con este proyecto lo que estamos haciendo es recuperar la memoria de la gente mayor, utilizando la lengua que se habla en el pueblo con palabras propias de este pueblo. Y lo estamos promoviendo mucho a través de redes sociales. Y creo que estamos en un punto donde nos falta dar un salto a mostrarnos y a hablar delante de la cámara y hablar la lengua. Mi lengua materna es el castellano y aunque yo hablo con esas palabras y hablo en catalán, sí que siento como ese síndrome, ¿no?, como de la impostora de, ostras, yo no soy de este pueblo realmente y yo no hablo esta lengua. ¿Y qué pasa, no? Como, ¿qué dirán? Que hay como este cuestionamiento y me parece súper interesante que lo hayáis traído. Y me vienen como muchas preguntas y me ha sido muy inspiradora la charla y lo que nos has compartido, porque pienso y anotaba, ¿no?, cómo llegar a las nuevas generaciones a través de redes sociales o de diferentes actividades y cómo llegar también a la gente mayor con esta brecha digital. Por ejemplo, nosotros tenemos 2 redes sociales que son Instagram y Facebook, y la media de edad de Facebook es muchísimo más elevada que la media de Instagram, lógicamente, e incluso nos planteamos, ¿es necesario continuar en Facebook o no? Y bueno, para mí como la reflexión es cómo impulsarlo desde lo digital, qué herramientas y qué plataformas se podrían utilizar, además de lo que estamos haciendo.
Bueno, está bien conectado a internet, ¿no? So we have this platform called Activismo Lenguas, where we map out different projects. This one's for Latin America in español, en castellano. It's como un directorio. It's like a directory of different projects that either we've come across or we know, or people have submitted their project. And so you can search by country, or you could search by language as well, or you could search by tool as well. So, I mean, there's different tools, whether it's software localization, memes, TikTok, audio podcasts. And so you can find all the projects that use audio podcasts, for example. So this is one that have projects from Mexico, from Colombia, Mexico, and then also interviews with different activists to talk about their work. So if you go into each page, there's a brief summary of the project. There's links, and there's example of kind of what they produce. Another part that's important, that the contact information, where if you want to learn more, if you want to maybe collaborate with them, there's an email or a contact way, and then just kind of classification. And so this is really a way to not only recognize and highlight these really interesting work, but also help facilitate contacts, connections with others. And so you may be a speaker of may be a speaker of Aymara, for example, and you could see all the projects in Aymara and potentially work together. So I think part of this digital activist work is doing so as a movement of doing something with similar goals, but also almost across the board. Digital activists who we know are very generous with their time, with their knowledge, with their skills, and they want to see how they can help others. And I think we've seen from many cases, even though a lot of the projects are very similar, they're not necessarily creating technologies, but rather using existing platforms to, use it in different ways. But seeing examples, seeing how others are using it is probably the best inspiration. I've seen so many cases where people are listening to a presentation, and for example, Wikipedia, seeing that in Quechua, someone in the crowd who's a speaker of another language, that's so cool. I want to do something similar for my language. How do I do that? And so that's sort of our role in Rising Voices, is to help maybe connect them or suggest ways to do so. But in the end, they're the ones stepping forward and opting in and saying, I want to do this, instead of someone saying, you should do this. Because that sometimes happens where, we did a study 8 or 10 years ago where we looked at Wikipedia in indigenous languages of Latin America, because sometimes you can't tell who's editing, who's involved with it, because everyone can use anonymous names. There's not like necessarily a visible person. And so we're really curious about how these sites are being maintained, who's behind it. With a colleague from Mexico, he would contact some of the editors and find out who they were, why they got started, why they're involved. And we discovered that many Wikipedia sites were started by non-speakers. Because I think, maybe they're well-meaning, that they want to create the infrastructure so that it's easier for speakers to join. But then again, it does cause issues where someone not from the community is deciding things for the community, which way to write it, which way to, which variant it should be used. And so these are decisions that in theory should be done by the community, but seeing those examples were really eye-opening. For example, the top editor for the Wikipedia in Quechua, it was a username, Aliman Runa. And my colleague I think he reached out to him and wrote to him and asked him like who you were. I mean, very polite way, like, I want to know more about you. And Runa in Quechua means man. And Aliman, it was a German guy who learned Quechua, and he was the top editor for Wikipedia in Quechua. And so that was kind of interesting to see that. But then again, so my point is, like, there's lots of projects that are out there, and there's so many more that we haven't been able to include in the directory, which is a good thing. I mean, there's more projects, more accounts, more campaigns happening every time. But I think it's a good place to start to see what's out there, who's doing what. Right now it's only in Latin America. We would love at some point to expand to the whole world, because I think there's so many great things not happening outside, and I think people can learn. I think there's some really great opportunities. I know traditionally, some groups working with the Basque language have some connections with Latin America groups. I think there's really some really interesting opportunities for cross-regional, cross-cultural exchanges. I know we were talking with Ellen about maybe exploring some of that. With Welsh language, I think there's lots of things different communities can learn from, but also at the same time, lots of things that are very specific to the Welsh context that may not apply to every country. But I think in the end, a lot of people are very much the same, that they want to see the language thrive and live on, and there's different ways to do so. So just wanted to maybe share that site. Are there projects that you know of in Catalan and other languages that you really like, that you could talk about, that you could share? Maybe in Yucatan as well, Joseph. You mentioned Didier, who is a superstar. He's a really interesting person. He does everything. He writes children's songs. He sings cumbia in Maya. He creates videos. He has a radio program. He teaches. He's just really amazing person. But it's really cool to celebrate those people. And I always love to learn about others. And again, when I went to Wales for a training school, I learned so many great initiatives there, and we'd love to kind of feature them on our networks as well, so that more people can know about that. So I don't know, do you have any examples that you could share that I could learn from as well?
In fact, this was going to be my next question, but you have already answered that. How could we involve or encourage European minoritized communities to participate? And I wanted to know if you have ever done any workshop in Europe, and if you have seen any differences in the approaches to the languages. Probably there are not the same issues with connectivity and with access to internet and all these technical issues, but probably the ideological or the needs of these communities are not
different from the ones with those you have been working with. And this workshop was thought to be a way to connect what you have been doing, especially in Latin America, but in some other parts of the world with the European communities. Unfortunately, there are not many here, but we can use Ellen, that is a member of the Fosterlang consortium, to show the work you have been doing and to connect them with, and maybe I haven't attended never one of your workshops, so I don't know exactly if they could work with other communities. Maybe you or Mariona, that you know the community in the Occitan community in the north of Italy, may think about if it could be interesting for them or any others, and maybe we can organize in the future. Do you have online workshops as well?
Every once in a while, yes. We did run one of the workshops with Irish language, with Wikimedia Ireland.
Or maybe Asha, if you think with the LEMCO or some other communities that could be interested in this kind of
Yeah, thanks. I think that having a cross-language workshop would be really interesting as well, because I think that with international work that we do in LN and also that we do in the projects that we have in our centre, we think that actually, you know, we had some discussion about sort of transfer of best practice and so on earlier this morning and in other parts of the day. I think that it's up to the individuals and up to the communities what they want to take, isn't it, from what's being shown to them. It's not a process of imposition of your own kind of worldview on anybody, is it? It's trying to get that exchange happening. And I think that, you know, what this discussion just now around, you know, imposter syndrome and who's got the authenticity and who's got the right, and, you know, all the power dynamics, very complex, that exist in minoritized language communities. And the minoritized is the you know, is the right descriptor for many of the languages that we are living in and researching as well. And those power dynamics are very often contradictory. You know, I think that in some cases there are people who may not consider themselves to be native speakers who feel a sense of imposter syndrome, and people who are considered by others to be native speakers and they feel an imposter syndrome. I think we're all feeling imposter syndromes in different contexts. And I think that one way of getting over the imposter syndrome as well is that we work with people who are in similar situations to ourselves. And I think that internationalizing the experience of minoritized language speakers is a really important part of knowing how to be a minoritized language speaker in the world. And I think that having something like this, which would be an activity, is again a way of you know, putting the focus on that period of reflection. And when you're listening to other people describing their feelings and their responses to their situation and so on, then you're listening as well, aren't you? And you're listening and you're thinking about, oh, is this true in my case? Oh, no, I don't agree with that. Or, you know, even when you mentioned just now native, you know, I mean, I was thinking, I'm used to hearing the word native in an English-speaking environment in a research context. But when we're speaking in English about the Welsh language in Wales, we don't use the word native in that context. And all these concepts carry different meanings for us as to extract from them. And I think in many ways, the international exchange is really about exchanges in concepts. We learn much more in a deeper way when we start to think about what's being said in a conceptual way, rather than, oh, was it 34% or was it 42% of people who speak Catalan? I think that's where it's that deep learning that really helps us to understand ourselves better through talking to people who are in similar, comparable, different situations. So that's a very long way of saying, yes, we'd like to do an LN workshop with this. On a completely different note, right? One of the things that's come to the fore for us recently is around subtitling and social media content, because of the way that people speak. And then there's an expectation from, let's say, media entity produced content now, sort of broadcaster produced content for social media. There's an expectation that social media content carries subtitles, so that you don't have to switch the sound on. So if you've got a really boring lecturer, you can just go on your phone and follow social media. But anyway, so I think in some languages, and I don't know if this is the case in Catalan, but I know that in Welsh and in Basque, that we're looking quite seriously now at how we're transcribing or how we're subtitling spoken, informal, unscripted Welsh and Basque when it's used by broadcasters in like vox pops and stuff like that, or also when it's used, when subtitling is used by sort of person-created content. And obviously with Catalan, okay, it's not in Catalan now, but with Catalan and this sort of machine-assisted simultaneous subtitling, it was not.
Not assisted.
Totally, okay, totally. Then, of course, the machine knows to remove what I've just said now, doesn't it? It doesn't take any notice of all the ums or all the so exactly. But when I'm speaking, a little bit like that, it doesn't. When I'm doing it naturally, it doesn't take any notice. But a human subtitler isn't always as perhaps intelligent as this automated. Perhaps the human subtitler, in some cases, goes towards transcription rather than subtitling, in order to do what? To reflect what was being said, rather than to communicate in written form what was being said. And I think that there's a lot of stuff happening around that. I mean, I suppose in a quicker way of saying it, the human subtitler sometimes includes the mistakes that you make when you're speaking live in the subtitle. For what purpose, I don't know. In order to reflect better what was said. So sometimes when you're using perhaps a loan word, whereas if you were writing, you wouldn't use it, or if you wanted to script yourself, you perhaps wouldn't use it. So this kind of conversation is happening in Welsh and in Basque at the moment. How do we reflect what's being said through subtitles for social media content? And are we doing a disservice to intelligible, the comprehension of the written form by over reflecting the oral, an oral version of the written form, if you like. I don't know, maybe I'm not explaining myself very well.
So we don't. I mean, this is completely automatic and statistically based. So there's no intention or purpose, and this is really a pilot. And as you can see, and of course, these fluencies in speech are hard to tackle, and sometimes the system just hallucinates. I don't know exactly which part. I'm very curious to know whether it's the speech recognition or the translation. When there is a lot of disfluencies and strange things, it just hallucinates. So it's doing its best. It will get better. It's really very, very basic. It's a prototype. About what you were saying, so what I have observed in the social networks nowadays is that closed captioning or subtitling in the original language is it's everywhere. So the young generations are used to read at the same time that they are listening to, which is really, it's really curious. It's something that I wouldn't have expected some years ago. I don't think this is a bad thing for language or their cognitive skills. And about what you were saying, that you are doing these studies or research in Welsh and Basque about whether you need to reflect all these disfluencies or just or improve the content. I think that's something that is very personal, right, to the content creator. So yeah.
But when you have the Basque public service television and the Welsh television, then it becomes a public discussion.
Yes, you're right. Yeah, I was thinking in terms of personal content.
And of course, what they decide also has an impact on the personal choices because it sets the phrase.
I wanted to contribute to this discussion because apart from academic work, I translated over 100 movies from German into Polish, and I think that audiovisual translation is never actually includes these sounds. If a human being does the translation of a short movie, it's always rephrasing because it needs to fit into the screen. So I also find it very interesting that long feature movies are captioned in a different way than social media. And I think this is also something interesting to sociolinguistically to follow, that here this rephrasing, this art of putting so many words into a shorter sentence is not, there's no canon for that, so to say, for social media. And so thank you for noticing that as well. Thank you.
So a question for Eddie. Probably you are more familiar with the social media in minority languages. Is this trend towards same language captioning also happening in this kind of content? You mean, TikToks in Quechua, are they also?
I don't know. I'm sorry, I don't know. I think trying to think. I don't think they have options for that yet, but I'm sure it's going to happen pretty soon. But I imagine it's not.
I'm not sure how the content creators do that. It's not that it's done automatically by YouTube or anything. It's something that they add in the process of editing their content. So anyone creating content in Quechua can also add it.
I think there's some apps that automatically does it in the larger app. Yeah.
I think this is one of the developments that they are producing in the other project that we talked about yesterday or the day before, that are working with the Sardinian, Catalan, and Irish language. They are just developing ways to subtitle or documents or products, audiovisual products that already exist on the internet, or just the products that in that case, students or influencers produce in those languages and subtitle them into or translate them into English or any other language to promote the production in these languages. But I'm not really sure about what technology are they using, but they know.
Yeah. So they are, when I say it's part of the content, it's because they are not really subtitles like those ugly looking lines under. No, they are part of the content and the fonts they use, everything. It's part of the graphics. And it's also a good way to, and it's also it's always in the same language. And it's also a good way to learn for second language learners.
I'm sure it's coming sooner or later. I mean, there's some options on YouTube. I think it's an app as well where they automatically dubs videos in different languages, but they can still retain the original person's voice. I don't know if you've seen that. That's kind of scary.
But that goes against the original language, right? Because it gets obliterated.
You talked about Europe, whether we offered the workshop. This is one we did with Ireland and with Gaelic language. And we partnered with Wikimedia group in Ireland, and they had the same workshop. So this was like the same workshop happening in 5 different countries, not on the same day, but around the same time. So we worked with our team to create the curriculum, but each group can adapt it to their own needs. And so we provided some, rough guidelines, but each can adapt it. For example, in Ireland, instead of each person having their own roadmap, they created one group one. And they actually presented this to the Irish government as kind of another contribution for recommendations on the government Irish language support scheme action plan for delivery of the digital plan for the Irish language. So, for what it was worth, it was something that they said this has come from this workshop, which I thought was really cool. And then just in general, Global Voices, we're legally based in the Netherlands, even though we don't have an office there, but we have a presence in Europe. And so we're always looking to see how we can connect. And this is the Twitter account that Mariona mentioned. We haven't had anything for a number of years, partly because of kind of how problematic Twitter or X has been, in terms of hate speech around just kind of loose rules these days. And so we haven't necessarily followed up with this, but, we have 2 or 3 years of a lot of information there. And what we did is interviewed our hosts before they took over. There's Mariona there, worked with Breton, Circassian from Turkey, Basque, Aragonese. Do you know her? Yeah. Irish language, Gallo, Asturian, Udmurt but the thing is, even though we may not be able to connect activists from different regions, part of our work at Global Voices is to be able to translate this by our volunteers. So for example, this activist, we had an interview with him. He works with Asturian. He has an NGO, but he talks about his work. There's a project called Play Presta, which helps disseminate spaces for YouTubers and podcasters in Asturian. But the interview was done in English, but then our team was able to translate it into Bengali, for example, and Malagasy. And so you can see the same interview is now available for speakers from Bengali. So it's another way for us helping to amplify this great work and helping for this work to be known in more languages. And so that's sort of something in the meantime that we like to do. And then this is the Global Voices page in Catalan, and these are some of the rising stories that were translated. And so interviews with African activists are now available in Catalan. So this is someone from Ghana, and the volunteer Oscar, I don't know him, but he's a volunteer, but he found this article to be interesting enough to spend time to translate it. And so now this is available for Catalan speakers to maybe learn about what others are doing in Ghana, for example. And so there's lots of potential for cross-regional contacts, exchange, communication, even if it's just articles. I think there's more things in common than differences. But in terms of like any other experiences, I know these forums, for example, are great opportunities to learn, to meet others from Colombia, from Pakistan, from many other places. But in general, are there other exchanges or other collaborations that you've seen with maybe Catalan and other language communities? Or even within Europe, I think Catalan and Basque collaborate often, or not necessarily. What communities is Catalan?
Welsh, Catalan, and Basque. The three of them are always everywhere.
But collaborating, not that
But sometimes.
we share a lot of information, projects, but collaborate with different real projects together.
I mean, for many years, we worked together through my Cantor project with linguistic. So we had a region partner that campus center applications with CMA, then after that with the University of Barcelona, with Ávila. So that was for like 20 or more years for the projects.
And then Brexit came.
We've got in our university, we've got in our centre, we've got actually had a chair in sociolinguistics, so we're a Basque scholar, a Basque researcher in sociolinguistics coming to Wales for a period at the water. There's a lot of collaboration that is maybe one-off for the duration of the project. And then one of the reasons why we wanted to set up the Chipani chair was to have some elements of perhaps stability or to have an anchor point for the collaboration. There's also, memoranda of understanding about the bilateral,
Yes.
so there's Wales, Basque Country, Wales, Catalonia, but presumably, there's collaboration between.
Well, in fact, there is this project funded by the Catalan government called Ávila for technology. And we had some conversations with Wales, and Welsh is included in our model. Yeah.
We've done some artistic projects as well with writers, translators, theatre, bands as well. Music. There's quite a lot of different projects, I suppose, happening. I don't know if people remember Popalvia. It was like a little quiz. It's a Basque invention.
An app. That was a mobile app. Yeah, yeah.
That started in Basque and then
Mm.
to Wales and then went
To Catalan.
as well
Mhm.
into Catalan language. Yeah.
But in terms of within Spain, is there collaboration or solidarity with other languages that may be facing, or is it? I'm just asking, like, generally interested, or can it also be seen as competition for like maybe limited resources? I mean, because I know not all the languages here have the
Since
same conditions.
the resources don't come from the central government, so there's not this competition. No, there are points of collaboration with the Basque and with the people from Galicia. Yeah. I mean, I have projects. I have been in projects together with people from the University of the Basque Country and University of Vigo or Santiago. Yeah.
At the university level, at the research level, there are lots of spaces where they can collaborate and share. In the world of activism as well, we are in contact. All our communities or organizations have contacts with the Basques and with the Galicians and also with the Asturians and with other minoritized languages in Europe, and because we have the same legal system, the same framework, legal framework, and also the way society functions. So yes, we share, but always is the same. Depending on the context, you can apply the same activities or not. So yes, it's always interesting to know, to learn about, and then if it's possible to adapt. But it's really difficult to, because Catalan and Galician, it's easier because they are Roman languages, so we can have some parallelism with the dominant language. With the Basque, it's more difficult because they have to follow different issues with the learning of the language.
And then there have been some European initiatives to document and survey the state of the art of technology for all official and regional languages. So that's documented.
It's already, a bit confusing because my name's Ellen and then I'm with Ellen as well. But on top of that, there's also an LA, which is it's like it's a really good interactive site as well, isn't it? Where you can see the digital language vitality, let's say, or the presence in different in different aspects of language technology of different language communities across Europe, including the so-called regional minority languages. Yeah, loads. I can't even remember how many. It's like over 50 languages, I think, in that site. So that's something as well that we've collaborated on. And I think also, I mean, I would say this, wouldn't I? But I think that, an NGO like Ellen as well brings a sense of regularity and sustainability and stability as well. Because, as Monica was saying, sometimes you've got a project maybe lasts 2 years and then maybe you don't get another one or you don't get a follow-up. But you've always got these sort of more long-standing networks that are not also person or individual reliant, because we know that that is also something that everywhere, isn't it? It is a people thing, and sometimes some individuals are making some of those connections to happen. And I think that for all languages, it's really important to have that sense of constant renewal, isn't it? As you do the international work, so it's important to provide opportunities for people to come into the field, isn't it? And in our case, we have a problem in that not many young people can speak languages other than Welsh and English, So, okay, so you're bilingual, you've got two ways of looking at the world, I suppose. Earlier when you were talking about what's the English word for appropriar, was it? And I was thinking, I'd never actually thought of that as a problem, because in Welsh we have a word and it actually means, that you, but I think in English you say you own it, don't you? You own it. And if you own it, it's that sort of rebellious thing that you were talking about earlier. So I think that just having some sense of understanding and being able to speak a little bit of a language other than your own, I think it actually does help somehow in sort of getting into the culture, even though so many people, speak English these days. I think it's still important for people, even if we've got English as a common language, to not to be completely reliant on being able to, to understand what's going on. And I think that, I don't know how this happens in other contexts, but sometimes, people would project themselves as being an expert, perhaps on the Basque Country at home, in Wales. They can't speak Basque at all, and they can't speak Spanish or French either. And these are people who would be absolutely fuming if somebody were to say, I'm an expert on Wales, and they can't speak Welsh, but they don't see it themselves, So I think that, engaging somehow in a connection with the language is actually quite important.
Okay, if there is any other question, I think it's time to stop our very, very long meeting. No, I cannot wrap up. Wales. Okay, if you want to say anything. Perché non
No.
te... Ha sortit allà les ballenes.
No,
So
just
the 3 days it has been saying so silly things, this translator, that it's quite funny, but I don't know if it's useful.
no, just thanks for coming, and thanks for the feedback and the conversation. I really wanted to be open like this and learning from you as well. So hopefully just provided a small taste of what we're trying to do with Rising Voices, of connecting people, supporting speakers, and helping them achieve what they want to do. I think it's really important that that's a big part of it, that it's self-determination, it's autonomy, but they do so feeling that they have a support system and people that want to support them in their work. So thanks. I'm sort of losing my voice after that, but I really appreciate all the conversation and input from everyone. So thanks.
Muchas gracias. Ara sí, doncs, tothom cap a casa.
Sí, tothom a casa, però, Mònica, volem...
Thanks. Good to see you again.
Good to see you again. I don't know where, Mexico. Are you off to Bolivia next in the coming days or no? Or
I'm going
What
to
are your
Chicago
plans?
first for another
Okay, you're going
conference,
to the US.
and then back to Bolivia next Friday. But
Okay.
we're gonna have
That's a lot of
another summit.
traveling. Wow.
Next summit in Yucatan will be 2027.
Okay.
So you're not gonna be around that.
I'd love to be there. Yeah.
Probably in Mérida because of the
Okay.
logistics, but we'd love to
Yeah,
do it somewhere else.
I remember.
Campeche
It was
or
really
the-
cumbre y Mérida. That was nice, no? I mean, it went well, no? The kind of the Museo Maya and everything.
A little far away from
Yeah, from the center.
but
Yeah, but
the infrastructure was nice.
Yeah.
But yeah, we'll see. Campeche maybe. We'll see.
Yeah,
It's
excellent.
too early
I'd
to
love
tell.
be there, yeah.
How often do you go?
With the activists. Yeah.
Bye.
Thanks
Okay.
a lot.
Buena
Muchas
mucha.
gracias.
Yeah.
Nos vemos.
Thanks a lot. Yeah. Safe travels.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. See you later.
I don't know who this, but